In this lesson, we're going to be looking at how to evaluate squares and square roots. So first we'll need to make sure we know what happens when you multiply numbers with zeros on the end, like these ones. There's a very nice shortcut. What you do is you multiply the non-zero numbers normally, and then you just add all the zeros on the end. So 3 times 4 is 12, so write down 12, and there are a total of 3 zeros, just whack them on the end. Very nice shortcut when you're multiplying these sorts of numbers. And we'll also be using BODMAS in this lesson. So quick run through BODMAS, brackets, then powers of, which is the one we're interested in this lesson, division, multiplication, addition, then subtraction. And remember also division and multiplication go in either order, as do addition and subtraction. And so the key thing is when you're working it out, work out one thing at a time. So here the brackets go first. 3 plus 7 is 10. So I write down the 5 times. I haven't used that yet. Then I write down the 10 and then the minus 4. So the only thing that changed from here to here is that 10. And then so no crossing out or anything like that, just write it on the next line. What do I work out next? I've got the 5 times 10 has to go first, multiplication before subtraction, according to this, multiplication before subtraction. So 5 times 10 is 50, write it down. I haven't used the minus 4 yet, so just write that down. And then 50 minus 4, that's 46. So first let's start with squaring, and you've seen this sort of thing before with our index numbers. When you've got a number with a little 2 up the top, that's referred to as squaring the number. So, and just means multiply by itself, and so 8 squared there, that's the same as 8 times 8, which equals 64. The next symbol, which you may not be familiar with, is the square root symbol. And this means find the value that multiplies by itself to get the number that's inside there. It's exactly the opposite of squaring. So if you had square root of 25, we have to think, well, what times is by itself to get 25? Now you can just use trial and error. 1 times 1's 1, that's no good. 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16. None of them are any good, are they? Because they don't get 25. But 5 times 5, that gets 25. So that means that the square root of 25 is 5. And when it just asks us just this by itself, just to show a tiny bit of working there, just to show why it works, we're just going to write underneath that it's because 5 times 5 equals 25, just to remind ourselves of that. Now, sometimes when we're square rooting, we'll get a number like this that has got a bunch of zeros at the end of it. And there's a nice little shortcut we can use to deal with those zeros. And so what we do is we start by square rooting the 9, the non-zero, normally. So we do our usual trial and error method, and we end up with 3 times 3 is 9, so that means that the answer there is going to be 3. Now, to deal with the zeros, we're basically going to write down half the number of zeros in our answer. Now, here's the reason. 10 times 10, that's 100. Notice that all that happened is the number of zeros doubled there when I went 10 times 10. And if I go 100 times 100, that's got 2 plus 2, which is 4 zeros. Notice that each time the number of zeros is doubling. So if I'm looking for a number that times by itself to get to this one that's got 4 zeros, I know the number I'm timesing must only have 2 zeros, because when I times it by itself, it always doubles the number of zeros. So we square root the 9 normally, and then the answer is going to have half the number of zeros that this question had. And since we know the square root of 9 is 3, we know the answer is 300. And once again, underneath we just write down why we know that's true, just to double check. And we can check that. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros for the 90,000 there. And when you're doing your BODMAS, the squares and square roots are both powers of. And so if I look at this one here, I've got to work out the square roots and the squares first. Now, it doesn't matter which order you work them out in. I'm going to do the square root first just because it's right there. And so the square root of 16, I don't need to show any working for this one, because that's not the point of this question. The point of this question is, can you do it with BODMAS? And so you can just work out squares and square roots in your head when you're doing these BODMAS questions. So do your trial and error. What multiplies by itself to get 16? It's 4 times 4 is 16. So that means that I just change this square root 16 straight into 4. And this 6 squared I haven't used yet. And then what's 6 squared? 6 times 6 is 36. So I change that 6 squared into 36. Now I can add these guys together to get 40. And we should note you can actually go straight from that one down to that one there just by doing these both in the same step. You can do them both in the same step because they're both the O's in BODMAS. They both happen at the same time, so that's okay. So some examples. We're going to evaluate 6 squared. So write down 6 squared, and we know that's 6 times 6, so write that down. And then underneath, write equals 36. Remember, we don't want to put another equal sign on the same line here, so it's fine to set it up like this, but then underneath is where you write your equals 36, not next to it. You don't want more than one equals on the same line. Okay, the next one, we're going to evaluate the square root of 9. So write down the square root of 9, and then we do our trial and error. 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 3, it's 4, 3 times 3, that's 9. So that means it equals 3, and then underneath we just write down why that works. It's because 3 times 3 is equals 9, just confirming it. Now one of those ones with the zeros. So ignore the zeros to start with, just look at the 36. You've got to work out the square root of 36 just by using that trial and error. We knew that 3 times 3 was 9, 4 times 4 is 16, 5 times 5 is 25, 6 times 6 is 36. So it's 6. And then we halve the number of zeros. So let's write down the question first. That's always the first step there. And then we know it's 6 for this part here, and we halve the number of zeros, so it's going to have 1 0. So that means it equals 60. And underneath, we just confirm it by showing that 60 times 60 is indeed 3,600. Now let's have a look at a BODMAS one, and so I'll start by writing down the question. Now the key thing to understand here is when you have a square root sign like this, everything inside it, it's like it's in brackets, and so it looks a bit like that. We just don't write the brackets down, so we're gonna have to work out all of this first before I'm allowed to do any square rooting. Now that makes sense. Even though powers of is up here, well, I can't square root until I know what I'm actually square rooting, can I? So of course I'm gonna have to work out all of this first. So out of all of this, the 3 squared would have to be worked out first, because 3 squared plus 7 powers of comes a long way before addition. So 3 squared is 9, so write it underneath, change the 3 squared into a 9. Leave the plus 7 as it is. Now we still have to work out 9 plus 7, because again, it's still like they're in brackets here. So I've still got to work out this part first. So 9 plus 7 is 16. And so now I'll be able to work out the square root. Now you could say the 16's in brackets, right? But it doesn't matter. If brackets are only around a single number, then they don't do anything. So we don't need to write that down. So we work out the square root of 16, and by using our usual method, let's see, it's 1 times 1 is 1, and going up, eventually you'd work out that 4 times 4 is 16. So that means the answer is just 4. So make sure you go down the page with those, and if you do have square roots, you've got to work out everything inside the square root before you can start doing the actual square root. Here's a few practice questions that we can try. Remember to pause the video. And there's the solutions to those ones with the working you should show, but you could have skipped this step really, because in this one you can work out that one and that in the same line and go straight down to there. So in the first one we had to work out 9 squared, so I wrote it down, and I know that squaring means times by itself, so 9 times 9, which is 81. In the second one I had to deal with these zeros here, so I started by ignoring them, and I worked out the square root of 49. And doing my usual method of trial and error, I worked out that 7 times 7 equals 49, so that means it had to be a 7 here. And there were 2 zeros in the question, so halve that, that means there's 1 0 in the answer. And underneath I just confirmed it by noting that it's because 70 times 70 equals 4,900, which was of course our question. And in the last one here, started by writing it all out, and I had to work out the powers of first. This 100 is it's just a single number there, so I can work that out straight away whenever I want to. Don't have to worry about brackets or anything, because there's only one thing inside the square root sign. So 9 squared is 9 times 9, which is 81. I worked that out first, and then using the trial and error method, 10 times 10 is equal to 100, so that means that this square root of 100 just turns into 10, and then 81 take away 10 is equal to 71. And of course I could have gone straight from that line down to that one if I wanted to. Hey, here's some more practice questions if you need to give them another go. Remember to pause the video. And there's the solutions to those ones. And that's the end of the lesson.